The white corridor of the alien ship hummed with nervous energy as Dr. James Wilson stared at his captors. He wasn't sure whether to laugh or be concerned. 6 tall, blue-skinned aliens were pointing what looked like scanning devices at him, their 4-fingered hands trembling. "The readings must be wrong," the tallest alien said, its translator converting the clicks and whistles into English. "No living being should have such biological readings." James crossed his arms, still wearing his white doctor's coat from the small-town clinic where they'd picked him up. "Maybe your machines are broken," he suggested calmly, finding the whole situation oddly amusing despite being essentially kidnapped. Captain Blue, as James had mentally nicknamed the lead alien, moved closer with slow, careful steps. Its large eyes blinked rapidly, all 3 eyelids moving in sequence. "Our technology is the most advanced in 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. The error must be in you." "Well, I'm just a regular human doctor," James replied, shrugging. "Nothing special about me." The aliens exchanged looks that seemed to suggest they strongly disagreed. Their long necks twisted as they whispered among themselves, their translator devices temporarily switched off. One of the smaller aliens, wearing what appeared to be a medical uniform, approached with another scanner. James recognized the scientific curiosity in its eyes, the same look he often had when encountering something new and fascinating in his own medical practice. "Your internal temperature," the medical officer said. "It's practically boiling. Yet you live. You move. You think clearly. How is this possible?" James couldn't help but smile. "That's just normal human body temperature. About 37 degrees Celsius." The aliens recoiled in unified horror. Their own body temperature, James would later learn, was barely above their ship's ambient temperature. "And look at this," another alien chimed in, holding up a different scanner. "The being's skeletal structure is filled with living tissue. It's constantly destroying and rebuilding itself." "That's just bone marrow," James explained patiently. "It's where we make blood cells." The medical officer nearly dropped its scanner. "You manufacture blood inside your bones. Your species deliberately maintains a system of continuous internal destruction and reconstruction," Captain Blue asked, mandibles twitching in what James assumed was disbelief. "Pretty much," James nodded. "It's how we stay alive." The aliens moved back, forming a tight group, their voices rising in what sounded like an argument. James took the opportunity to examine his surroundings more carefully. The ship's interior was pristine, with flowing curves instead of sharp angles. The air smelled slightly metallic, and the gravity felt just a bit lighter than Earth's. Finally, Captain Blue turned back to him. "Dr. James Wilson of Earth, we apologize for the abrupt nature of your acquisition. However, you must understand. Our initial scans of your planet detected anomalies we couldn't explain. We needed a specimen, a representative. It quickly corrected itself to verify our findings." "And what findings are those?" James asked, genuinely curious now. "Your species should not exist," the medical officer stated bluntly. "By all known scientific principles, you are impossible. Your metabolic processes alone violate several established laws of biological development." James laughed, which caused another round of nervous twitching among the aliens. "I think you'll find humans are full of surprises." "Indeed," Captain Blue agreed, "which is why you must be examined thoroughly. For science, for knowledge, for the safety of all spacefaring races." "Well," James said, straightening his doctor's coat, "as a fellow medical professional, I'd be happy to help. But next time, maybe just ask. We humans generally respond better to polite requests than to being beamed up without warning." The aliens looked embarrassed. At least, James thought that's what the purple coloring of their face membranes meant. "Noted for future reference," Captain Blue said formally. "Now, if you would follow Dr. Red to our medical bay." As James walked down the corridor with his alien escorts, he couldn't help but wonder what other perfectly normal human traits would shock them. Something told him this was going to be an interesting day. The alien medical bay looked like something from a science fiction movie, filled with floating holographic displays and strange devices James couldn't even begin to identify. Dr. Red led him to what appeared to be an examination table, though it seemed designed for a body shape quite different from human. "Please position yourself here," Dr. Red said, gesturing to the table. "Our diagnostic systems will begin the detailed scan." James sat on the table, watching with interest as various instruments descended from the ceiling. Suddenly, all the machines started flashing red warnings. "Impossible," Dr. Red exclaimed, hitting several buttons on a floating control panel. "The equipment is malfunctioning." "Again. What seems to be the problem?" James asked, trying not to smile at the alien's obvious frustration. "Your internal systems are registering as multiple separate organisms. The scanner believes you are a colony creature, not a single being." Dr. Red's hands moved frantically over the controls. "And these readings, they suggest you have millions of foreign bodies inside you, yet you show no signs of distress." James couldn't hold back his laughter this time. "Those would be my gut bacteria. Every healthy human has them. They help us digest food." The medical officer froze. "You deliberately maintain foreign organisms inside your body." "We couldn't survive without them," James explained. "They're part of our digestive system." Captain Blue, who had been observing from the doorway, made a sound that the translator didn't even attempt to interpret. Dr. Red tried another scanner, which immediately started smoking. "This one claims your cells are actively destroying themselves, thousands of them, every second." "Apoptosis," James nodded. "Programmed cell death. It's normal. Our bodies are constantly replacing old cells with new ones." The medical officer's color shifted to a pale blue. "Your species deliberately programmed your cells to commit suicide. It's how we prevent cancer, among other things," James explained, "though it doesn't always work perfectly." "And these structures," Dr. Red pointed to a holographic display of James's internal organs, "they appear to be specialized for deliberately damaging other organisms." "That would be my immune system," James said. "White blood cells and such. They attack anything that shouldn't be in our bodies." The alien medical staff in the room all took an involuntary step back. "Your body maintains an active military force?" Captain Blue asked, mandibles clicking rapidly. "That's an interesting way to put it," James mused. "But yes, I suppose you could say that." Dr. Red attempted one final scan, only to have the machine shut down completely. "This is unprecedented. We need to recalibrate all our equipment. Your biology violates every safety protocol we have." "Maybe I could help explain how human bodies work," James offered. "I am a doctor, after all." The aliens huddled together, discussing something in their native language. Finally, Captain Blue turned to James. "You would be willing to share knowledge of your species' biology?" "Of course," James replied. "That's what doctors do. We share information to help others." "Even with aliens who essentially kidnapped you?" Dr. Red asked, sounding genuinely puzzled. James shrugged. "Well, I figure the sooner you understand how humans work, the less likely you are to accidentally cause a diplomatic incident by kidnapping more of us." The aliens had the grace to look embarrassed again. "Very well," Dr. Red said, pulling up what appeared to be a recording device. "Please explain how your species manages to survive while being, by all reasonable standards, a walking biological disaster." James grinned, settling more comfortably on the examination table. "Well, let's start with the basics. The human body maintains a constant internal temperature through a process called homeostasis." As he began his explanation, James noticed how the alien medical staff leaned forward, their eyes wide with a mixture of horror and fascination. He had a feeling this impromptu xenobiology lecture was going to be very entertaining. "So let me understand this correctly," Dr. Red said, mandibles twitching nervously. "When your species experiences damage to its support structure, the bones simply repair themselves." James nodded, pointing to an old fracture mark on his arm's X-ray equivalent that the alien scanners had detected. Yep. This was from a bike accident when I was 12. Completely healed in about 6 weeks. The medical bay erupted in chaos as the alien medical staff processed this information. 3 junior medical officers had to sit down, their color shifting to a pale green. 6 weeks. Captain Blue whispered. Our species would require surgical replacement for such damage. The idea of bones regenerating. And that's not even the most interesting part, James continued, warming to his subject. Humans can actually become stronger after healing from injuries. Our muscles and bones adapt to stress. Dr. Red's third eye began to twitch. You're saying damage makes you more resilient? Within reason, yes. It's why we exercise, James explained. Controlled stress makes us stronger. Exercise. Captain Blue tested the word carefully. You deliberately damage yourselves to become stronger. James thought for a moment. I suppose that's one way to look at it. We also do it to maintain our endurance capabilities. Endurance? Dr. Red asked, already dreading the answer. Humans are persistence hunters, James explained. In our early history, we could chase prey until they collapsed from exhaustion. We can regulate our temperature through sweating, which lets us cool down while running. The medical bay went completely silent. You chase prey until their bodies fail. Captain Blue's translator barely managed to convey the horror in its voice. And the liquid excretion. Sweating. It doesn't harm you. Dr. Red added, frantically taking notes. Not at all. In fact, a healthy human can sweat several liters per day if needed, James said. We can also go days without food, maintain consciousness after significant blood loss, and survive extreme temperature ranges. A junior medical officer in the back of the room fainted. Temperature ranges? Dr. Red asked weakly. Well, humans have survived temperatures from around -40 to +50 degrees Celsius with proper preparation, James said casually. Our bodies are pretty good at adapting. Captain Blue had to steady itself against a wall. Such temperature variations would kill most known species instantly. Oh, and we're basically walking chemical factories, James added enthusiastically. Our livers can neutralize all sorts of toxins. Evolution gave us the ability to digest a wide range of substances that would be poisonous to other species. Dr. Red's color had shifted to what James now recognized as the alien equivalent of a horrified pale. Your bodies naturally produce antidotes to poisons. More or less, James shrugged. We can even build up immunity to certain toxins through controlled exposure. Controlled exposure to toxins, Captain Blue repeated slowly. You deliberately poison yourselves to become resistant to poisons. Some people do, yes, mostly in controlled medical settings, James explained. We call it Mithridatism. The medical staff looked at each other in silence, their expressions unreadable to human eyes, but their body language screaming disbelief. And you consider all of this normal? Dr. Red finally asked. Pretty much, James replied. Though I have to admit, seeing your reactions is making me appreciate just how remarkable human biology really is. Captain Blue straightened itself, making what seemed to be an official gesture. Dr. James Wilson, I believe we need to significantly revise our understanding of your species. You are not simply another form of life. You are walking biological horror stories, James suggested with a grin. I was going to say extraordinary survivalists, but your description might be more accurate from our perspective, Captain Blue admitted. Just wait until I tell you about how humans can learn to hold their breath for extended periods, or how we can survive losing entire organs, James said cheerfully. The sound of another junior medical officer hitting the floor echoed through the medical bay. Perhaps, Dr. Red suggested hastily, we should save those revelations for after we revive our staff. We must verify these claims, Dr. Red announced, having finally revived all the fainted medical staff. With your permission, Dr. Wilson, We would like to conduct some controlled tests." James looked around the testing chamber they'd moved to, which resembled a large empty room with various monitoring equipment along the walls. "What kind of tests are we talking about?" Captain Blue stepped forward. "Nothing dangerous by your species' apparently extraordinary standards. We simply wish to observe your capabilities firsthand." "Sounds reasonable," James agreed. "What's first?" The first test involved temperature resistance. The aliens watched in amazement as James remained comfortable in conditions that would have sent them into protective hibernation. "Remarkable," Dr. Red muttered, watching the monitors. "His body is actively fighting the temperature changes, maintaining internal stability through this sweating mechanism." "Try increasing the heat," Captain Blue suggested. The temperature rose. James took off his doctor's coat, but otherwise seemed unaffected. "It's like a hot summer day back home," he commented casually. The aliens' next test focused on endurance. They set up what they considered an extremely challenging obstacle course, designed to test the limits of most known species. James jogged through it easily. "He's not even breathing heavily," one of the junior officers noted in disbelief. "Let's make it more challenging," Dr. Red suggested, adjusting the course's difficulty. An hour later, James was still going, having completed multiple rounds. He had worked up a good sweat, but showed no signs of stopping. "How much longer can you continue?" Captain Blue asked, fascination evident in its voice. "Oh, probably for several more hours," James replied, jumping over a barrier. "This is actually good exercise." The aliens quickly moved on to strength tests, not quite believing their previous readings. "Your species can lift more than half your body weight?" Dr. Red asked incredulously. James tried not to laugh. "Most humans can lift much more than that with proper training. Some can lift several times their body weight." To demonstrate, he easily lifted a piece of equipment that the aliens typically moved with anti-gravity devices. "Impossible," several voices exclaimed at once. "And you're saying you're not even particularly strong for a human?" Captain Blue asked. "I keep in shape, but I'm no athlete," James confirmed. "Professional weightlifters would consider this warming up." The final test involved reaction time. The aliens set up a series of lights and asked James to touch each one as it activated. What they didn't tell him was that they were gradually increasing the speed beyond what they believed possible for organic life to process. James kept up. "His neural responses are faster than our best combat pilots," Dr. Red whispered to Captain Blue. "And he claims he's just a regular doctor." "I'm starting to understand why their species advanced so quickly," Captain Blue replied. "With biology like this, they would survive conditions that would wipe out most civilizations." Finally, they called a halt to the tests. James stood in the center of the room, barely winded, while the alien scientists pored over their readings. "Dr. Wilson," Captain Blue said formally, "we owe you and your species an apology. We assumed, based on our understanding of biology, that humans were a primitive species that had somehow achieved spaceflight. We now realize we were severely mistaken." "No offense taken," James replied cheerfully. "Though I hope this means you'll stop randomly abducting humans for tests." "Indeed," Dr. Red agreed. "Our findings suggest such actions could be hazardous to our health. Humans are clearly far more capable than we anticipated." "Though I do have one last question," Captain Blue added. "You mentioned earlier that you're just a regular doctor. What would happen if we encountered one of your soldiers or athletes?" James grinned. "Well, let's just say I wouldn't recommend it. They might not be as patient with the whole abduction thing." The aliens looked at each other nervously, their color shifting to what James now recognized as their equivalent of pale fear. "I believe," Captain Blue said carefully, "it's time we updated our first contact protocols." The ship's alarms blared without warning, startling everyone in the testing chamber. Red lights flashed as Captain Blue's communicator crackled to life. "Captain, engine core malfunction," a panicked voice reported. "Radiation containment is failing in engineering section. Evacuate all personnel," Captain Blue ordered immediately. "Seal off the affected areas." James watched as the aliens rushed into action, their movements betraying their fear. What's happening? Our main engine core is destabilizing, Dr. Red explained hurriedly. The radiation levels are rising to lethal levels. We need tow. Another alarm joined the chorus, this one even more urgent. Life support failing in engineering. Someone shouted. Temperature rising beyond survivable limits. Captain Blue's color turned almost white. The backup systems. Also failing, Captain. The radiation is affecting all our systems. James stepped forward. What needs to be done to fix it? The manual override controls are in the engineering section, Captain Blue said. But no one can survive those conditions. The radiation levels alone mold. How long would someone need to be exposed to fix it? James interrupted. Dr. Red checked the readings. Perhaps 5 minutes to reach the controls and stabilize the core. But it's impossible. The radiation would kill any living being in seconds, and the temperature in that section is now beyond. What about a human? James asked quietly. The aliens fell silent, their eyes all turning to him. The readings indicate radiation levels off. Dr. Red began. Humans can survive brief exposure to radiation, James said. And you've seen our temperature tolerance. What's the alternative? The core will breach in approximately 15 minutes, Captain Blue said slowly. The ship will be destroyed. James was already taking off his coat. Then we don't have much choice, do we? Tell me what I need to do. You can't be serious, Dr. Red protested. Even with your species' remarkable resilience, the combined conditions would be. People are in danger, James said simply. I took an oath to help those in need. Now, tell me what buttons to push. The next few minutes were a blur of quick instructions. The aliens explained the override sequence while fitting James with what protective gear they had, though they warned it would provide minimal protection against the conditions he'd face. The moment you feel overwhelmed, get out, Captain Blue insisted. We can attempt evacuation procedures. I'll get it done, James promised, checking the seal on his borrowed protective suit. Just keep the path to engineering clear. As James stepped toward the sealed doors leading to engineering, Dr. Red caught his arm. Why would you risk this for us? After we abducted you. James smiled. Because that's what humans do. We help when we can. The doors opened, releasing a wave of heat that made even James step back momentarily. Beyond lay a corridor filled with a visible haze of radiation. Good luck, Dr. Wilson, Captain Blue said solemnly. James took a deep breath and stepped forward. The heat was intense, far worse than any sauna he'd experienced. His skin prickled from the radiation, and warnings flashed across his borrowed helmet's display in alien script. But he kept moving. The aliens watched their monitors in horror as James made his way deeper into the engineering section. His vital signs fluctuated wildly, but he remained conscious and mobile. His cellular structure is showing damage, Dr. Red reported tensely, but he's still functioning. How is this possible? Keep watching the readings, Captain Blue ordered. The moment they reach critical. I've reached the controls. James's voice came through the comm, strained but clear. Starting the override sequence now. The aliens held their breath as James worked. Secondary alarms continued to blare, but slowly, the primary warnings began to quiet. Core stabilizing. Someone reported in disbelief. Radiation levels dropping. He did it. James. Captain Blue called. Dr. Wilson, can you hear me? There was a long moment of silence before James's voice returned, weak but amused. I could really use some water, he said, and maybe some discussion about updating your safety protocols. The medical bay was unusually quiet as Dr. Red treated James for radiation exposure and heat stress. The human doctor lay on the examination table, sipping water through a straw while his alien colleagues hovered nearby, their medical scanners working overtime. By all known medical science, you should be dead, Dr. Red stated, reviewing the readings from the engineering incident. The radiation dose alone. Humans are pretty radiation resistant compared to most mammals on Earth, James explained, his voice hoarse but stable. Not immune, but we can handle short exposures. Captain Blue stood at the foot of the examination bed, its color shifting between shades of blue and green. The engineering team has analyzed the data. You were exposed to enough radiation to kill most known species instantly. The temperature in that section was hot enough to cook proteins. Well, James coughed slightly. I won't say it was comfortable, but sometimes you have to push through discomfort to help others. The medical monitors beeped steadily, showing James's vital signs slowly returning to normal. Dr. Red kept glancing between the readings and James with what could only be described as professional awe. Your cells are already repairing the radiation damage, the alien doctor noted. The rate of recovery is unprecedented. That's another thing about humans, James said, attempting to sit up before Dr. Red gently pushed him back down. We heal pretty quickly when we need to. Captain Blue moved closer, its posture formal. Dr. Wilson, you saved this ship and its entire crew. We owe you a debt that cannot be repaid. Just doing my job, James replied with a weak smile. Though I have to admit, this is a bit beyond my usual small-town practice. A junior medical officer burst into the bay, excitement clear in its movements. Captain, the engineering team has completed their analysis. The core malfunction, it wasn't an accident. The room fell silent. Explain, Captain Blue ordered. The core was deliberately sabotaged, the officer continued. We found evidence of tampering. Someone wanted to test how we would respond to a crisis situation. All eyes turned to James, who raised an eyebrow. Don't look at me. I was with you the whole time. No, Captain Blue said slowly. This was a test, but not for us. The timing is too perfect. Someone wanted to see how humans would react in a crisis. Dr. Red's color shifted rapidly. You mean someone higher up in our scientific hierarchy? Captain Blue confirmed. They weren't satisfied with just biological scans and physical tests. They wanted to see human resilience and decision-making under extreme conditions. James sat up successfully this time, despite Dr. Red's protests. So this whole thing was staged. People could have died. No, Captain Blue said. The core was never in danger of actually breaching, but the radiation and heat were very real. They wanted to see if a human would risk their life to save others, even aliens who had essentially kidnapped them. James rubbed his face tiredly. And what did they learn? That we have severely underestimated humanity, Dr. Red answered. Not just your physical capabilities, but your capacity for self-sacrifice and your commitment to helping others. The data from your rescue attempt has already been transmitted to our central command, Captain Blue added. I suspect it will cause quite a stir in our scientific community. James lay back down, feeling the fatigue of his ordeal catching up with him. Well, next time you want to test human capabilities, maybe just ask. We're generally happy to help with scientific research. No kidnapping or life-threatening emergencies required. The aliens had the grace to look embarrassed, all except Captain Blue, who seemed to be receiving new information through its communicator. Its color shifted to a deep, serious blue. It seems, the captain announced, that our superiors are very interested in opening formal diplomatic relations with humanity. Your actions today have changed many minds about your species. Wonderful, James muttered, his eyes drifting closed. But first, I think I need a nap. Being a test subject for alien scientists is exhausting work. 1 month after the incident, James stood before the Alien Diplomatic Council, still wearing his trademark white doctor's coat. The vast chamber was filled with representatives from various alien species, all gathered to hear his testimony about the events aboard Captain Blue's ship. Let me be clear, the head counselor spoke, its translator conveying the gravity of the moment. You knowingly entered a lethally radioactive environment, endured temperatures that would kill most species, and did so to save beings who had essentially abducted you. That's correct, James replied simply. though I'd appreciate if we could stop mentioning the abduction part. Captain Blue and Dr. Red have apologized quite thoroughly. A murmur ran through the assembled aliens. In the front row, Captain Blue and Dr. Red sat with their science team, their colors shifting with what James now recognized as pride. Our scientists have reviewed all the data, another counselor stated. We have officially classified humans as Death World Apex survivors, with a special notation about your species' tendency toward what we term irrational altruism. James couldn't help but smile. I'm not sure about the irrational part. Helping others seems perfectly logical to me. You consider risking death to save those who wronged you logical? A third counselor asked. We consider helping anyone in need logical, James corrected. It's part of who we are as a species. We've survived and thrived because we work together and help each other. The head counselor raised all three of its hands for silence as the chamber erupted in discussion. Dr. Wilson, your actions have forced us to reconsider many of our assumptions about emerging spacefaring races. We had classified humanity as a primitive species that somehow achieved spaceflight. We were mistaken. Very mistaken, Dr. Red added from the audience. Their biology alone defies our understanding of what's possible, and their psychological resilience. Which brings us to the purpose of this gathering, the head counselor continued. We wish to establish formal diplomatic relations with Earth, not as patrons to a developing species, but as equals. James straightened. I'm just a small-town doctor. I'm not really qualified to. You've demonstrated the finest qualities of your species, Captain Blue interrupted. Who better to help bridge our civilizations? The council presented James with an official document, the first draft of a treaty between Earth and their alliance of spacefaring races. As he read through it, he noticed several interesting additions. All member races are advised that humans possess extraordinary physical and psychological capabilities. Caution is advised in any first contact situations, he read aloud. Under no circumstances should humans be underestimated or subjected to unauthorized testing. We've learned our lesson, Dr. Red said, mandibles clicking in what James now knew was amusement. Furthermore, the head counselor added, we're establishing a joint medical research program. Your species' biological capabilities could revolutionize our understanding of life itself. As long as no one else gets kidnapped, James said firmly. Agreed, Captain Blue nodded. Though I must ask, would you consider serving as an advisor to the program? Your medical knowledge and first-hand experience with both our peoples would be invaluable. James looked around the chamber, at all the alien faces watching him expectantly. He thought about his small clinic back on Earth, and about the incredible opportunity before him to help bridge two civilizations. Well, he said finally, I did take an oath to help those in need. I suppose that extends to helping aliens understand humans better, and helping humans understand aliens. The chamber erupted in what passed for applause among the various species present. Just one condition, James added with a smile. Next time you want to test human capabilities, just ask. We're generally happy to help with scientific research. No life-threatening emergencies required. Noted, the head counselor agreed. Though I suspect humanity will continue to surprise us, regardless of what tests we devise. Count on it, James replied, thinking of all his fellow humans back on Earth. We're just getting started. And as he stood there, a small-town doctor who had somehow become humanity's first real ambassador to the stars, James couldn't help but think that sometimes the most extraordinary adventures begin with the simplest of moments, even if those moments involve being accidentally kidnapped by well-meaning aliens.